Okay, so we're back for another round here on making sourdough starter from scratch. If you haven't seen the first video, I'm going to link it down below and at the end of the video, and you can check that out. But basically, showing you the next steps here. So this is whole wheat rye flour, organic. Just added some water, got this nice consistency. And this has been sitting for just about 24 hours. Now, you can probably see it a little bit, but it might be hard to make it out over the video, but there are a couple of tiny little air bubbles in there, and there is definitely a kind of strong smell to it. Not an unpleasant smell, but just kind of like a doughy, kind of a little bit like a strong doughy smell. And that's good. That means that the yeasts are definitely activated in there, and the natural bacteria that's found on the flour. So what you're going to do now is basically just take a little bit more of the flour, and when you're doing this, you basically always double whatever you had. So this, we started off with 2 spoonfuls, heaping spoonfuls of flour, so we're going to add 2 more. So, you know, here's one. Sorry, it's kind of tricky doing this with one hand. I always have trouble with this. That's 2. We're going to add some water and try and get that same kind of consistency back. And what you should start seeing is, you know, we're going to let this sit again. And what you hope is that as the bacteria and the yeast get more and more active, they will actually get you'll start seeing those bubbles sooner and sooner. So now, instead of, you know, waiting for about, 24 hours, you should hopefully see those bubbles in about 12 hours. And, pretty much I'm doing this at night right now, so hopefully tomorrow morning I should see some bubbles in this. And, you won't see any kind of rise in the flour yet, obviously, because the bacteria is not active enough to make enough, carbon dioxide and get the rise going in the dough. So you basically, will only see that after you've reached a certain level of kind of maturity of the bacteria, and that's when you will actually start seeing some rise. Now, I might add a little bit more water to this, but this is getting pretty close to the right consistency. What other things that I want to say about this? Yeah, the lid is really just to keep the dust off the flour, the dough, and it's not something that you actually want to seal, because as this starts getting more mature and working, it's going to produce carbon dioxide, and if you put the lid on tight, it will actually kind of pop up and shoot off the lid. So that can be kind of scary if you're not expecting it and you're just kind of sitting around in your house and all of a sudden you hear a big pop. It's just the lid being thrown off the top here. Now, what I also want to show you is some mature starter. This is my starter that I've been using now. I made this about 6.5 years ago now, actually. And what you do, you can actually see the bubbles in this one a lot better. And hold on, let me get a clean spoon. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. So you can see that this is the starter that I've had in my fridge. This was left over from the last time I baked bread. And what you do is you always save a little bit of starter. And what you end up doing is, you just kind of keep a little bit left. You give it some fresh flour, and then you put this into the fridge. For the next time you want to bake it. You can see all the little bubbles in there. Those are all, the little bacteria working for you there to give the eventual bread the rise that you want. So those are what create those little air pockets, in your bread. And again, what I said before is what you always want to remember. You always want to double what you have. So the way I've made this for the next batch of bread that I'm going to eventually bake is I took 2 heaping spoonfuls of just plain white flour, and then I took out 2 spoons of the starter that I had already kind of fed and grown and was getting ready to mix it into a bread mixture. and I took 2 spoonfuls of that sourdough and just put it back in with the 2 spoonfuls of the white flour. And then I put in a little water and mixed it up, covered it, put it in the fridge. When you do this, this will stay in your fridge. Of course, it depends on the temperature of your fridge setting, but for at least, 1 to 2 weeks, I would say is typical with a colder setting on the fridge. Sometimes you can do a little longer, but after that, you really have to kind of basically take it out and feed it. Even if you're not going to make bread, you want to just take it out and refeed it and give it more flour and water, and and or make a full portion of bread. The reason for that is that if you just let it sit for too long, even in the fridge, it will continue to ferment and kind of eat the fresh flour that you've put into it, and it will start getting really, really sour and produce a lot of alcohol. So if you ever take out your starter from the fridge and you open it and it smells like booze, that's what's happening. It's actually making the carbon dioxide and the alcohol. So you can just pour that off. There's no real damage, but if you leave it long enough, it will get acidic enough and alcoholic enough that it will actually just kind of kill the bacteria, and you can lose your starter that way. So don't think it'll stay forever. It won't keep forever in the fridge, but usually at least a couple weeks, no problem. If you know you're going to be away for a long time and you're not going to be able to bake bread, what you want to do is freeze your starter. Freezing it will actually not kill the bacteria, which is very interesting. So you can freeze it and then thaw it out. I've actually, given people starter, and you can just basically, propagate it at will. So if you just take a spoonful of this, add a spoonful of white flour, you can just give this to somebody else, and they can just always double it. And basically, the time needed for the feedings is, really dependent on the temperature and, all sorts of other conditions. But what you want to keep in mind is that once you have a mature starter like this, you will actually see the rise of the dough, and it will basically double in volume. And that's about the maximum rise that you'll see. And at that point, you know that it's time to feed it, or that it's not going to rise any further. So like right now, if you see if I've got this volume, if I'm going to double what's in here now, I've got 2 spoonfuls of the original sourdough, 2 spoonfuls of sugar. So that means that, or not sugar, sorry, flour. So there's 4 spoonfuls of flour in this mixture right now. I'm going to add 4 more. I'm going to bring up the level to say around here. And when I leave this sitting out overnight, when I get up in the morning, you'll see that it will basically have risen up to here and probably even collapsed at some point, because it won't hold that, rise forever. So it'll rise, and then eventually it'll kind of collapse a little bit on itself. But basically, that rise from the fridge is going to be a lot longer, obviously, than if it's just the rise once it's already been fed at room temperature. If you're running a bakery, you pretty much never put this in the fridge. You would just have this out all the time. And at night, you would just, feed it, and in the morning come back in and work it into, breads, and always just save a little bit and keep the process going. So you would, take a little bit out, put it to the side, and start feeding that. And by the evening, you'd have a big batch ready to go for kneading into bread the next day. So anyway, that's how things were done kind of back in the day when people were baking their breads, on a daily basis. So yeah, but I think in modern times, most people unfortunately don't have time to do that. I know I don't usually. And so what I do is I put it in the fridge. But I hope that's a good amount of information now. I'm going to go ahead and put in 4 spoonfuls of the white flour into this. And I'll check back in the morning and show you guys what it looks like. And one last thing I think that I want to share is, why is this in a white flour and why is this whole wheat? As I said in the first one, when you're making your starter, it's recommended to use a whole wheat rye flour, especially important to get organic, so that there's no fungicides, antimicrobial, anything added to it, and chemicals that would prohibit the natural yeasts and bacteria to start growing. Once you have an established starter, you can actually move it to a white flour, and they say that that kind of keeps that strain of bacteria going easier, because there's no chance of some new strain or new bacteria coming in from a different type of flour, like if you switch brands or some other location or whatever. So you can do whatever you want. For the longest time, I actually had two starters. I had one that I would always use rye flour for, and I had one that I switched to a white flour. But after a long trip, I didn't actually freeze them, and my rye flour one died out. So that's why I now only have this one. But it's going strong, 6.5 years, and this one's really, working great. And I'm actually gonna, show you guys the, finish this one out, and I'm gonna give this away as a gift to someone. And yeah, so I'll show you guys how to do it, and I'll check back in the morning and show you what this looks like.